Hi, I'm here today at the City of Lakes Waldorf School in Minneapolis, and I'm really excited to interview Marty Stewart, the administrative director of the school. She has teamed up with Marjorie Martirano to co-host two screenings of the pre-release of a film, an award-winning documentary film, Generation Zapped, this weekend. So I'm going to turn the camera around here. And Marty, first of all, Marjorie, if you can just say hi for a minute.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here, and I have a friend that teaches at this Waldorf school and asked him if he thought they might be interested in being a sponsor or allow us to show the film here, and he came back with like an immediate yes, and now we'll find out why.
Well, Marty, I know that this history the school has a very interesting history actually with the filmmakers of Generation Zapped, and I'm wondering if you'll just speak to me for a minute about, I understand they had approached you because the school has been without wireless for about 15 years. Could you just share a little bit of that story, please?
Yes, and it was actually in 2010 when we were approached by someone who gave us information about this concern that led us to make a choice to be a Wi-Fi free school in 2011. So it's been about 7 years that we've been without Wi-Fi in the building.
Well, could you share a little bit about what happened, or that was a fascinating story you shared a little bit with us before. If you'd share the kind of how that came to pass.
Well, this parent who was interested in enrolling her child in the school approached our admissions director at the time, Caroline Askew, and asked whether we would ever consider getting rid of the wireless in the school that we had put in a few years before, because her own child was extremely sensitive. And so that Caroline, being a curious person, was asking questions, and the mother, who was an attorney, provided volumes of material of different studies that had been done and decisions that had been made in other countries about wireless in schools. And so Caroline became very interested, read everything she could read about it, and then we continued to take some steps to have some testing done in our building, and we made a decision collectively as a school that just as a precautionary measure, we would not have the Wi-Fi in our school, particularly with a concern around young children, since we serve preschool through grade 8.
Wow, and can you just share a little bit about how that was received by other parents, and also maybe a little bit about what the impact's been on the school, on the children, and the community? Share a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, if you think back just 7 or so years ago, there was a lot less conversation and information about this than there is now. So when we made the decision, it certainly impacted teachers who couldn't, use an iPad, around the building, and people had to kind of plug in, and we had just moved into that wireless phase, so people were at first somewhat irritated, or it was a bit of a burden. But we already were encouraging parents not to use cell phones in the hallways because we're a very low-tech kind of school environment. So it wasn't really such a big deal, other than maybe parents at board meetings couldn't, take notes or things like that on their computers. But overall, I think that we kind of kept it a little bit down low that we had made this decision. We weren't really advertising we're a Wi-Fi free school at that point, because there's a lot of skepticism. People kind of like climate change, perhaps. There's not everyone who wants to think, and nobody wants to think, that the things that we're doing every day are negatively impacting our health. But we all realize that there's been very little time for any kind of research that can really convince us one way or another what the long-term effects are of these radio waves or EMF. And so we're just taking a precautionary stance. And certainly when you think that, elementary schools in France, or, if places where they have done a lot of research and whole countries are making these decisions, it certainly got our attention and thought there was no reason why we wouldn't take that precautionary stance on behalf of our students. In Waldorf schools, we are really looking at trying to provide a very calm and environment, particularly to the senses, just in terms of everything that we do. And so it just made a lot of sense for us as an education that's very holistic and looking at the whole child and the health of the child and the developmental appropriateness of what they're exposed to and when, that not having Wi-Fi in the school and not being dependent in any way on needing that for our students, because we don't use computers in the classroom. So we didn't need that for our children, and so we just were able to work without it.
Wow. Well, you mentioned a little bit about what they're doing in France. I know they're taking Wi-Fi or have taken Wi-Fi out of the schools. The other thing you've mentioned a few times when we've spoken is really this idea of the precautionary principle. And I know when we spoke a little bit earlier too, the evidence that this attorney brought in kind of on behalf of her child, and that argument was really, I guess, what public health doctors, researchers, scientists who were demonstrating that there is probably enough evidence of indicating maybe some concerns that would cause you to want to take, or some people to want to take, a precautionary stance on that precautionary principle in any case. I'm just curious too if there are any other thoughts you have or anything else you'd want to share with everyone today regarding your school, this decision, and kind of the general climate here on that.
Well, I guess I would just say that I think that there's so many times in history where something that we have thought was perfectly fine, we end up finding is not so perfectly fine. And certainly like smoking cigarettes is one of those norms where it was just accepted, and then now it's really considered something that's really, really harmful to our health. And I think that in this age of rapidly growing technology, we really have to be careful and pay attention and be cautious about all of these new tools that in some way, are really advancing communication and our society and the possibilities in a good way. But there's always something else to consider, and that we want to make sure that on behalf of our children, in a world where they're being bombarded by so many things, that we are really taking a stance of protecting our children and trying to assume, that there might be a danger, rather than put our heads in the sand and hope that there isn't a danger. And they're going to be growing up with this for so many more years, and the young developing mind and body is so more vulnerable to these kinds of dangers than we are as adults, even though we might assume that there might be a lot of illnesses that adults suffer from that could be related to this phenomena as well. But
oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. And I guess I can't remember who I heard recently say this, but children are 20% of the population, but 100% of our future. So I just thank you for the work you're doing here at the City of Lakes Waldorf School in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Marjorie for teaming up with Marty for really changing the world. Thank you so much, dear ladies, and thank you for hosting us tonight and tomorrow. And for anyone out there who is listening who wants to know about this, I think, I'll just go ahead and post the flyer for this event. If you've got friends, this is an absolutely fabulous, multi-award-winning documentary film, Generation Zapped, which we're screening here at the City of Lakes Waldorf School in Minneapolis, Minnesota tonight, 6 to 9 p.m., and tomorrow 1 to 4. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marty, and thank you so much, Marjorie.